a little bit of self-promotion, shameless plug, whatever you want to call it. I just want to share with you that I have 3 books out on Amazon. I'm going to hold up the paperbacks so you can see what they look like. First book, Hannah's Rainbow. This is my first book that is loosely based on my late grandma's life. Second book, Lorna versus Laura. This is a suspense romance. And third book, Laughing Matter of Pain, which is a spin-off of Hannah's Rainbow about her brother Harry. Those are available in paperback as well as Kindle on Amazon.com. Whoa. So as I record this, there are like some seriously dark clouds moving in. So anyway, hi, it's Cindy Hilston or Cynthia Hilston at cynthiahilston.com. So fun fact is that most people do call me Cindy. You can call me Cindy if you want, but it's C-Y-N-D-I. Cynthia is C-Y-N, so Cindy is C-Y-N. None of this C-I-N-D-Y stuff. It's C-Y-N-D-I, like Cyndi Lauper. So anyway, that's enough. Being a little silly today. So I just want to remind you guys before we get started here to hit the subscribe button below and ring that bell beside it if you want to be notified when I upload a new video every Monday. So happy Monday, guys, and I hope this is a good start to your week. And I do thank you so much for coming on the journey with me to writing a book. We're all busy mamas here, and I value your time, and I thank you for spending your time with me. If you ever have any comments, questions, or concerns, please put them below. I do read them and I will respond. I want these videos to feel like a conversation, not just me sitting here blah blah blahing. Okay, so let's get into today's topic. Researching for your story. So you've heard me mention research before. Chances are no matter what kind of story you write, you're going to need to do some research. And this is the thing that some people really shy away from. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have to do a bunch of research. I just want to write my story. Why do I have to do research? It's going to take away from the time that I'm going to do my writing. And you know, some people love doing research. You know, some people are like research buffs and they're like, yes, I'm writing a World War II story and I'm going to read every book there is. And, you know, maybe you're already, I read this one author who is like a World War II expert and her books are all set during that time period and they're wonderful. And you can tell that she has that solid foundation. So maybe you already know a lot about what you're going to be writing about. In another video I mentioned, you know, if you were writing a book that most of the story took place in a courtroom. Well, maybe you are a judge. Maybe you're a prosecutor. You're an attorney. So you probably know a lot about that stuff. And there are people who are like attorneys by day and authors by night, and they write crime novels. And they already know a lot about that because they're involved in that. So maybe you already are an expert at something. They do say to write what you know. To some extent, this is true. However, I have found that there is a lot you don't know. And I'm going to give you examples of things that I've had to research while I was writing my books, okay, to kind of help you out, to kind of give you an idea. So one of the first questions you want to ask yourself is, when does your story take place? If it takes place current day, which for right now as I'm recording this is 2018, then great. It's 2018. I know what the world in 2018 America is like. Okay. So when and where, those go hand in hand because that's pretty important to your setting. But if your book takes place in the past, you are going to have to do some research. You're going to want to research things like the slang of the times. It's the real McCoy. It's the 1920s, you know? Wow, that's swell. It's the 1950s. Groovy! It's the 1970s. I know I sound silly, but I'm just saying you want your characters, especially if they're teenagers or young adults who use a lot of slang when they talk, you're going to want to research the slang of that time to make their dialogue sound more authentic. Okay? And you're not going to want anachronisms in your story. What are anachronisms? Big word right here. Anachronism is something that appears out of its time period. So if I was writing a story that took place in 1940 and I mentioned this character went on the computer to surf the internet, that's a big anachronism. Okay, now I know that's like a dead giveaway, and you're like, okay, I'm not stupid. I know that people did not go on computers to go on the internet in 1940, but I'm just throwing that out there as a big bonk over the head as an obvious example of an anachronism. But if you're not sure, look it up. If you're not sure that somebody said a certain phrase or what's the origin of it, I Google this stuff all the time. What's the origin of this? I made the example, here's an example. I was writing my second book, which takes place in 1943, and I used the phrase out of the proverbial box. Now, first of all, I shouldn't have even used that phrase because it's a cliche, and cliches really should be avoided as much as possible. But beside the point, somebody pointed out to me that that did not come into usage until the 1960s. So, okay, big bonk over my head. There is an anachronism. And I have been guilty of using them before. I have tried to avoid them, but it happens. So be careful, especially in speech, that your characters sound like the time period they are from. Also, what major world events were going on during that time? If your story takes place during the 1940s, the early 1940s, you really can't, put your head in a bubble and act like World War II is not happening. Okay? So you have to think about what was going on in the world. If you are writing historical fiction, period details are important. Okay? What kind of cars they were driving, what kind of clothes they were wearing, the rationing that was going on during World War II. They couldn't just eat, a full, huge meal like they did these days. So these are all details that are important to the story. Oh, look, it's getting light out. Still cloudy and rainy. Getting distracted. Also, so that's when and where. Where? If it takes place in another part of the world, you're going to want to know what the culture is like there. What are their customs? All of a sudden, it is a whole lot brighter. If it takes place in a real city, it's good to know landmarks. Like my stories are in Cleveland, which is the general area where I'm from, Cleveland, Ohio. So if I mention something like the Terminal Tower, as long as it's after 1930 when it was built, okay, we're cool. If I mention Lake Erie, yes, it's really there. So, or major streets like Euclid Avenue. If your story takes place, though, in like a major city, you are going to want to probably mention major landmarks. This is just my preference, but if you're going to have your story take place in a suburb or a small town, I would probably recommend you make up a name, because that way you're not running the risk of using a real town or a real place and then somebody reads it from that town, and sometimes people are weird about these things and they get, offended or something because maybe you talk about something negative about that town. So I tend to shy away from using real names for towns and suburbs. Big cities are one thing, and I also make up my streets. I make up my street names, or they can just be vague, like Main Street, Elm Street. Every town has one, so if you want to use a street name, you can use something generic like that. That's just my suggestion, but research your story. Use Google and Wikipedia a lot. I talked about looking up, phrases that I wasn't sure, okay? But these are your friends, and with the internet, there's really no excuse of why you can't look something up. Equip yourself with the knowledge on whatever it might be that you need to research, okay? Another thing you probably are going to be researching are your characters. If they have a mental illness, researching your characters. If there's something about them, like they have a mental or physical illness, their occupation, what they do for a living is important. And if it's something you know very little about, probably want to research that. These are just certain things. For example, one of my characters is an auto mechanic. And one of the things I had to research was how a combustion engine works. And the story takes place during the 1930s, and so cars were very different then than they are now. So I had a picture of a car engine, and I would look up what different parts of it did. I talked about the exhaust system. It was like his first lesson, and so especially since he was being taught how to repair a car, I had to look that up. I also would have to look up, okay, if your car keeps stalling, what could be causing it? I've had to look up things like this is not yet in something I've published, at least not as I record this in 2018, but I have a guy who's a trucker in something, and so I had to look up trucker laws, something like idling laws about how long you're allowed to leave your truck engine go idle in different states, and just stuff like that. So these are examples of things I have had to look up, and certainly there are going to be things that are relevant to your character that you're going to need to research. If your book is like sci-fi or fantasy, takes place in the future, certainly, it's like the possibilities are pretty endless as far as that goes. But you still do need to establish certain ground rules. When J.K. Rowling wrote the Harry Potter series and there's magic, there were limitations to what magic can do. Like magic can't bring somebody back from the dead, for example. So you still have to establish what the rules are, if you will, what the laws are in the universe that you're creating. So that still is going to involve research. Where can you research? Well, the internet's a great place, but one thing I did use in my first book a lot were primary sources. My book, based on my grandmother's life, I used her diary, I used things she had written. She wrote a report back in high school about what her life was like growing up. So we're talking early 20th century. It's a very different time from today, and unfortunately she's no longer with us, so I don't have her here to talk with me. So I had to read things that she wrote about. There was something she wrote much later in her life with her sister, again about her life growing up. And so I did have primary sources to use. And so if you are doing something maybe based off of somebody you know, or even during a certain time period, if you do have access to primary sources, like maybe love letters, or even just talking to a family member, an older family member, that is also very helpful. To have those kinds of people and those kinds of primary sources available, because the internet is great, but depending on what you're writing, those primary sources can sometimes add a nice special touch to it. So I just wanted to thank you guys for watching this video and sharing on this writing journey with me. Again, I'm Cynthia Hilston with cynthiahilston.com. And all my social media links are below. Please follow me and don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!